The mouse was 5 years old before anyone realized he was supposed to be a rat. That's the detail I keep coming back to. The original character, the one the whole empire is named after, was designed as a rat. Chuck E. Cheese, a rat in a restaurant where you serve food to children. Somebody, somewhere in those early years, quietly decided he'd better become a mouse instead. And the costume changed and the whiskers softened and nobody ever really talked about it. And now if you say it out loud to a parent standing in one of these places watching their kid climb through a plastic tube, they'll blink and go, "Wait, a rat?" And you'll watch the whole thing reorganize behind their eyes. That's Chuck E. Cheese in a sentence, honestly. A thing that was slightly wrong from the beginning. Wrong in a way that was somehow part of the magic, held together by the sheer force of a very strange man's very strange vision. And then slowly, over 40 years, sanded down and refinanced and optimized and hollowed out until the strangeness was gone and there was nothing left to love. Only a brand and a birthday package and a token dispenser and a dead-eyed animatronic mouse gathering dust in a warehouse because it turned out the robots were the expensive part. Let me tell you how a restaurant like this even comes to exist, because the origin is genuinely one of the wildest in American business, and it does not start with pizza. It starts with Pong. You know the name Atari, even if you're too young to have touched one. Atari basically invented the home video game industry, and the man who founded Atari was named Nolan Bushnell, an engineer, a tinkerer, a genuine visionary, one of those people who seems to arrive on Earth about 10 years before everyone else and spends his life slightly out of sync with the present because he's already living in a future nobody's built yet. Bushnell made Pong, that absurdly simple game, 2 white paddles, a blip of a ball, bouncing back and forth. That was him. That was, for practical purposes, the beginning of the whole thing, the primordial ancestor of every video game that has ever existed. And here's the part people forget, the part that reframes everything. Chuck E. Cheese wasn't Bushnell's side project that he stumbled into after Atari. According to the people who were there, Chuck E. Cheese was the dream the whole time. His Atari co-founder, Ted Dabney, said it plainly. The restaurant was Nolan's passion project, even before Atari was a thing. Before Pong made him famous, Bushnell was already driving around the Bay Area looking at pizza parlors, brainstorming a concept. Atari, the company that changed the world, was in some sense the thing he did to get the money to build the thing he actually wanted, which was a pizza restaurant with robots in it. Because that was the vision. And to understand it, you have to understand what Bushnell loved. He loved Disneyland. Specifically, he loved the animatronics, the enchanted tiki room, the country bear jamboree, those rooms full of singing mechanical animals that Walt Disney had built, machines that performed, characters that weren't people, but weren't quite just machines either. Bushnell looked at those and had a very Bushnell thought, which was, why does this have to be locked up inside an expensive theme park in California that a family visits once in a lifetime? Why can't this be on a street corner? Why can't there be a little piece of Disneyland in every town in America that you can go to on a random Tuesday that has pizza and video games and a stage full of singing robots? Disneyland on a street corner. That was the idea. And he had the 2 things nobody else had that could actually make it happen. He understood the emerging technology of arcade games better than almost anyone alive, because he'd invented the industry and he had a real feel for the amusement business. He'd worked amusement parks in his youth. He knew how to separate a family from its money in exchange for delight. So he combined them. Arcade games, his own cutting-edge machines, the newest generation of them, plus skee-ball and the physical games, plus animatronic characters singing on a stage, plus pizza. Why pizza? Bushnell was refreshingly blunt about it. Pizza has a long wait time, which keeps families in the building spending money on games, and it's simple to make. Very few components, not too many ways to screw it up. The food was never the point. The food was the thing that gave you a reason to stay while the games and the robots did the actual work. The first one opened in 1977. He called it Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. And it worked. It worked immediately and enormously, because there had genuinely never been anything like it. For a kid in 1978, walking into this place was walking into a fever dream. Noise and lights and a giant singing mouse and games everywhere and pizza, and the sense that this entire building, unlike every other building in your life, existed purely for you, not for adults who tolerated you, for you. That was radical. That was, for a child, close to a religious experience. And there's something worth pausing on in that idea because it was genuinely new. Think about where a kid could go in the 1970s that was actually built for them. Almost nowhere. The world was built for adults, and children were tolerated in it. Sit still in the restaurant, be quiet in the store, don't touch anything. We'll leave when the grown-ups are done. Even the places nominally for kids, the playgrounds and the school gyms, were plain and functional. Disneyland was the great exception. The one place designed from the ground up around a child's sense of wonder, and it was 1,000 miles away and cost a fortune, and you went, if you were lucky, once. What Bushnell understood, the insight underneath the whole thing, was that the hunger Disneyland satisfied was universal and constant, and almost entirely unmet. Kids wanted a place that was theirs, and there wasn't one. Not within reach, not affordable, not on a Tuesday. He built the affordable, on a Tuesday, within reach version. He democratized wonder the same way Bill Darden democratized lobster, and Boston Chicken democratized the home-cooked meal. That's the shape of almost every great American chain at its origin. Someone takes a thing that used to belong only to the rich or the lucky and figures out how to hand it to everybody. Bushnell took the theme park and shrank it down and put it in a strip mall. And for a kid whose family was never going to make it to Anaheim, that strip mall was Anaheim. That was the gift. That was the thing worth loving. Bushnell wanted to grow fast, and here's where the seeds of everything that comes later, every bankruptcy, every collapse, and there are several, get planted. Because to grow fast, you need money and you need reach, and Bushnell made a deal to get both. He struck a huge development agreement with a successful Kansas hotelier named Robert Brock, a deal for Brock to develop hundreds of locations across 16 states. Brock was the founder of Residence Inns. He knew how to build and operate physical locations at scale. Great partner, on paper. Except Brock went to the restaurant, experienced the concept, loved it, and decided to build his own version, his own copycat chain. He called it Showbiz Pizza Place. Same fundamental idea. Pizza, games, animatronic characters on a stage. And now the man Bushnell had partnered with to expand Chuck E. Cheese was running a direct competitor built on the same blueprint. The two companies went to war. Legal war. Years of lawsuits. The similarities between the two concepts so obvious that lawyers got rich fighting over them, until finally a settlement was struck in 1982 worth around $50 million. And for a while there were two nearly identical robot pizza empires competing across America. Chuck E. Cheese with its mouse and Showbiz Pizza Place with its own cast of characters, a band of animatronic animals called the Rockafire Explosion, a bear and a gorilla and a mouse and the rest, which developed a fanatical, genuine love among the kids who grew up with them. A love that persists to this day in a way that's honestly kind of beautiful, and we'll come back to it. So that's the setup. Two robot pizza chains, born from the same deal, at war. Now watch how fast the founder loses everything, because it's stunning. The early 1980s happen, and the early 1980s were catastrophic for the video game business. There was a massive crash, the video game crash of 1983, where the whole arcade and home console industry, the industry Bushnell had built, cratered. Overnight, the thing that was hot became the thing that was radioactive, and Chuck E. Cheese, whose whole identity was tied up in arcade games, got hammered by the same wave that was destroying arcades everywhere. The company had also expanded aggressively, taken on the risks of fast growth, and when the market turned, it had no cushion. In 1984, Chuck E. Cheese's parent company, Pizza Time Theater, filed for bankruptcy. 7 years. From revolutionary phenomenon to bankruptcy in 7 years. And Nolan Bushnell, the visionary, the founder, the man who dreamed the whole thing up before Atari even existed, lost it. Lost the company he'd wanted his entire life, the passion project he'd built Atari to fund. He was pushed out of his own dream. And here's the almost unbelievable twist, the one that makes this a genuinely strange chapter of American history. Remember Robert Brock, the partner turned rival with Showbiz Pizza Place? When Chuck E. Cheese went bankrupt, it was Showbiz, the copycat, that emerged as the stronger company and effectively took over. The imitator swallowed the original. Showbiz Pizza Time, Inc. now controlled both brands, its own Showbiz locations and the Chuck E. Cheese locations. The Rat Mouse and the Rock-afire Explosion, once bitter enemies, now under one roof, owned by the man who'd started out as Bushnell's development partner. For years, they ran both. And then, in the 1990s, came the decision that broke a certain generation's heart. And it has a name that sounds like something out of a dystopian novel: Concept Unification. The company decided it didn't want to run two competing robot pizza brands anymore. It wanted one. And it chose Chuck E. Cheese as the survivor. So starting in the early 90s, it began converting all the Showbiz pizza places into Chuck E. Cheeses. And that meant tearing out the Rock-afire Explosion, the beloved bear, the gorilla, all of them, and replacing them with Chuck E. Cheese characters. The animatronic bands that thousands of kids had grown up loving, had their birthdays in front of, had genuine childhood devotion to, were ripped out of the walls and thrown away or sold off or left to rot, and a mouse was bolted up in their place. I want to sit on this for a second, because there's something in it that matters for the whole story. The Rock-afire Explosion did not die because kids stopped loving it. Kids loved it fiercely. There are grown adults right now today who have tracked down and bought and lovingly restored these exact animatronic robots, who keep them in their garages and reprogram them and post videos of them performing, who have spent tens of thousands of dollars and thousands of hours resurrecting a pizza restaurant robot band from the 1980s purely out of love. That's not normal nostalgia. That's devotion. The Rock-afire Explosion died because a corporation decided that running two brands was less efficient than running one. It was a spreadsheet decision. And it's the first time in this story, but not the last, that you see the pattern that actually killed Chuck E. Cheese. The thing people loved getting removed not because it stopped working, but because someone upstream decided it cost too much. Hold that thought. It's going to come back bigger. Through the late 90s and 2000s, Chuck E. Cheese, now the sole survivor, operating under a company eventually called CEC Entertainment, became a genuine institution. This is the golden age, the era most people actually remember, the Chuck E. Cheese of the collective memory. And it's worth describing what that place actually was, because it was more than a restaurant. It had become, for millions of American families, the default location of childhood celebration. Here is what it meant. If you were a kid in America across a span of about 3 decades, there was a real chance your birthday happened at Chuck E. Cheese. Not a birthday, the birthday. The big one, the one with your friends, the one you counted down to. And the whole apparatus of the place was built around making that kid feel like royalty for 2 hours. The birthday package, your name up on a screen, the mouse himself, a teenager in a hot costume, God bless them, coming out to your table specifically for you, and the whole restaurant, strangers included, singing to you. The tickets spilling out of the skee-ball machine, that specific sound of the tickets, and the running the numbers negotiation at the prize counter afterward, where you slowly, devastatingly learned economics. That the 200 tickets you'd spent an afternoon and your parents' $20 earning were worth, at the prize counter, one small rubber spider and a pencil. That was a rite of passage. That was a lot of American kids' first real lesson in the gap between effort and reward, delivered by a mouse. And think about what it did for the parents, because the genius of the model was that it solved a real problem for them too. Throwing a birthday party for a 7-year-old at home is a nightmare. The planning, the decorations, the cleanup, the containment of a dozen sugar-loaded children in your own house, the game where 3 kids cry and one gets a nosebleed on the carpet. Chuck E. Cheese took all of that and made it disappear. You paid a flat package price, you showed up, and the entire event happened somewhere else, run by someone else, cleaned up by someone else. The pizza appeared. The cake appeared. The entertainment ran itself. The kids exhausted themselves on the games and the tubes, and at the end you gathered up your specific children, verified by the hand stamp, and drove home, and your house was still clean. For a whole generation of overstretched parents, that was worth every penny. The place sold two products at once, wonder to the children and relief to the adults. It understood both of its customers perfectly and served them both at the same table. And the animatronics. In the golden age, the animatronic band still played. Chuck E. and his friends up on the stage, moving in that specific, jerky, not quite right way, singing, the curtains, the whole show. To a small child, this was wondrous, and to a slightly older child, it was already starting to be a little creepy, and to a parent, it was a chance to sit down for 90 seconds, and all three of those reactions were correct simultaneously, and that tension, the wondrous and the uncanny sharing one stage, was somehow the exact texture of the place. That creepiness, by the way, was never a flaw. It was part of the spell, and it's worth understanding why. The robots lived in what people who study this stuff call the uncanny valley, that unsettling zone where something is almost lifelike but not quite, close enough to alive to read as alive and wrong enough to make the back of your neck prickle. The fixed smiles, the eyes that seem to track you or seem to track nothing, the mouths moving slightly out of sync with the words. A child standing in front of that stage was having a genuinely complicated experience, delight and unease braided together, a safe little dose of the strange and the slightly frightening, in a brightly lit room with pizza and their mom nearby. That's a powerful thing to give a kid. It's why so many people who grew up with these robots have such intense, almost haunted memories of them. Not simple happy memories, but vivid ones. The kind that lodged deep precisely because they carried a charge of something that wasn't entirely comfortable. The animatronics weren't just entertainment. They were a child's first brush with the eerie, delivered safely. You cannot get that from a screen or a dance floor. A screen is never uncanny. A screen is just a screen. The robots were something stranger and more memorable, and when they came out, that specific strange charge went with them. There was even a piece of clever, genuinely thoughtful design that parents came to treasure: the hand stamp system. When you walked in, the kid and the accompanying adult got matching numbers stamped on their hands in ink only visible under UV light, and you could not leave the building unless your numbers matched. In an enormous, chaotic, crowded room full of running children, it meant no kid could walk out with the wrong adult. It was a real safety innovation, and it tells you that in the golden age, someone at this company was actually thinking hard about the experience, about the parents' fears, about how to make the place not just fun but trustworthy. Someone cared about the details. Remember that too. So by the 2000s, Chuck E. Cheese is huge. Hundreds of locations, a fixture, a brand so embedded in American childhood that "we're having it at Chuck E. Cheese" needed no further explanation. It had survived the video game crash, survived bankruptcy, survived being eaten by its own copycat, survived concept unification. It looked, from the outside, permanent. Like the mall, like something that would always just be there. And then, in 2014, the thing happened that this whole story has been walking toward. The thing that killed it. And you might already be able to guess the shape of it, because if you've paid attention to how these stories go, it's always the same shape. In 2014, Chuck E. Cheese, CEC Entertainment, was bought by a private equity firm, Apollo Global Management. The company was taken private in a leveraged buyout valued at around $1.5 billion. Now I have to explain what a leveraged buyout actually does, because the word leveraged is doing an enormous amount of quiet work, and it is the murder weapon in this story just as surely as it was in others. Leverage, in finance, means debt. A leveraged buyout means you buy a company using mostly borrowed money, And here is the part that should make you angry, because it's counterintuitive and it's how the whole game works. You don't repay that borrowed money yourself. You load it onto the company you just bought. The debt used to purchase Chuck E. Cheese became Chuck E. Cheese's debt. The company, in effect, was made to borrow the money used to buy itself, and then it had to pay that money back, with interest, forever, out of its own pizza and token revenue. So coming out of that 2014 deal, Chuck E. Cheese was suddenly carrying an enormous debt load it had never had before, reportedly on the order of $1 billion. A company that had spent decades as a beloved, functioning, cash-generating institution now had a financial anchor chained to it. And every single day it had to feed that debt before it could do anything else. Before it could refurbish a location, before it could invest in the experience, before it could maintain the very things that made it special. The debt came first. The debt always came first. And you have to understand why anyone would do this, why it isn't just vandalism, because the logic is important, and it's the logic that quietly hollows out beloved company after beloved company. From the private equity firm's point of view, the leveraged buyout is a beautiful machine. You put in a relatively small amount of your own money, borrow the rest, and use the borrowed money to buy the whole company. Because the debt lands on the company and not on you, your own actual investment is small, which means if things go well and you sell the company later for more than you paid, your percentage return on that small investment is enormous. Leverage magnifies your gains. That's the whole appeal. The debt isn't a bug in the plan. The debt is the plan. It's the thing that turns a modest profit into a spectacular one for the people who did the deal. The problem is that leverage magnifies fragility at exactly the same rate it magnifies returns. A company with no debt can have a bad year, weather it, and move on. A company loaded to the ceiling with buyout debt has no room for a bad year, because the debt payments don't care whether business is good. They come due regardless. So the very structure that makes the deal so lucrative for the buyers is the structure that makes the company underneath it brittle, exposed, one bad shock away from collapse. The firm gets the upside, the company carries the risk, and the customers, though nobody puts this in the paperwork, get a slowly worsening version of the thing they loved, because everything that made it good is now competing with the lenders for the same dollars, and the lenders win. And now, watch what happens to the magic when the debt comes first. Watch it happen in real time, because you lived through it if you're old enough. The animatronics started to disappear. Beginning around 2017, as part of what the company called a modernization effort, a plan reportedly costing hundreds of millions of dollars, Chuck E. Cheese began phasing out the animatronic bands. The stated reasons were the reasons corporations always give, and they're not even lies exactly. They're just the debt talking. The animatronics were expensive to maintain. They required specialized technicians, a dying breed of people who knew how to fix these specific weird robots. They were old technology. Modern kids, the thinking went, wanted digital dance floors and bigger arcades and screens, not creaky mechanical mice from the 1970s. So out came the robots. The stage, the singing animatronic band that had been the literal centerpiece of the concept since Nolan Bushnell dreamed it up watching the Country Bear Jamboree, got torn out of location after location and replaced with a dance floor, a big screen, a costumed employee, open arcade space. The thing that made Chuck E. Cheese, the direct descendant of the Disneyland animatronics that started the entire dream, the whole reason the place existed rather than being just an arcade with pizza, gone. This is the thing that never sat right with me, and I want to say it as directly as I can. The official story is that the animatronics were removed because kids didn't want them anymore, because tastes had changed, because it was a modernization. And maybe there's a sliver of truth in the tastes changing part. But look at the timing. The robots came out right after the leveraged buyout loaded the company with $1 billion of debt. And expensive to maintain specialist technician requiring animatronics are exactly the kind of costly, magical, inefficient thing that a company drowning in debt payments cannot afford to keep. I don't think the animatronics were removed because children stopped loving them, any more than the Rockefeller explosion was removed because children stopped loving it. I think they were removed because they cost money. And after 2014, there was no money that didn't belong to the lenders first. The modernization was, at least in part, the debt eating the magic and calling it progress. And this is the deeper tragedy of it, the thing that connects it all the way back to the beginning. Chuck E. Cheese was never really a pizza company. The pizza, Bushnell told us himself, was just the excuse to keep families in the building. The actual product, the thing you were really paying for, the thing that made a child's birthday feel like the best day of their life, was wonder. Manufactured, mechanical, slightly uncanny wonder. The singing robots, the show, the sense of having walked into a place that existed just for you. That was the product. And wonder is expensive. Wonder requires maintenance and specialists and inefficiency and someone in charge who cares about the details, who thinks about the hand stamps and the birthday song and the way the curtain opens. Wonder is the opposite of what a leveraged buyout wants, because a leveraged buyout wants every dollar optimized and extracted to service the debt, and you cannot optimize wonder. The moment you start asking, what's the cheapest version of this magic we can get away with, the magic is already dead. It's just taking a few years to stop moving. So through the late 2000s, Chuck E. Cheese slid into a strange in-between existence. Still open, still hosting birthdays, still technically the same brand, but hollowed out. The robots gone or going. The buildings, in a lot of cases, aging, worn, not refurbished, because the money went to the debt. The specialness leaking out of it a little more every year, replaced by a more generic arcade and pizza experience that was fine, that was perfectly fine, that was exactly as fine as 100 other places, and therefore no longer a destination, no longer the birthday, just an option. The thing that had made it irreplaceable, the wonder, was precisely the thing the financial structure could not afford, and so precisely the thing that got cut. And then 2020 arrived, and it did to Chuck E. Cheese exactly what it did to the buffets. It walked up to a company that was already fatally weakened and delivered the blow that a healthy company would have survived. The pandemic was, for Chuck E. Cheese specifically, almost perfectly targeted. Think about what this business is. It is, at its core, a large indoor room where you pack as many children as possible into a shared space to touch the same games, breathe the same air, climb through the same tubes, and eat together. It is a business whose entire value proposition is crowding kids into an enclosed space. That is the product. And in 2020, that product became not just unappealing, but impossible. Dining rooms shut down, indoor gatherings banned, the on-premise experience that was the company's entire reason to exist simply switched off by public health order. For a company with no debt and a healthy balance sheet, even that might have been survivable. Close for a while, wait it out, reopen. But Chuck E. Cheese was carrying that billion-dollar leveraged buyout debt. It had no cushion, because the cushion had been converted into debt payments in 2014. So when the doors closed and the revenue stopped but the debt payments didn't, there was nothing to fall back on. In June of 2020, CEC Entertainment, the parent of Chuck E. Cheese, filed for bankruptcy. Burdened, the report said, with about $1 billion in debt and forced by the shutdowns to abandon the on-premise entertainment experience that was its key point of differentiation. The exact language matters, its key point of differentiation. The company itself understood that the in-person experience was the whole thing, and the pandemic took the whole thing away while the debt kept demanding to be fed. Now, and this is important, and it's why the ending is stranger than a simple death, Chuck E. Cheese did not vanish. It's not gone the way Old Country Buffet is gone. It came through the bankruptcy. The debt got restructured. Ownership passed to its lenders. A firm called Monarch Alternative Capital ended up in control, and the company shed that crushing debt load through the bankruptcy process. There are still hundreds of Chuck E. Cheese locations operating around the world right now. You can still take your kid to one. You can still have a birthday there. But here's the thing, and it's the quiet, sad heart of all of it. The Chuck E. Cheese that survived is not the Chuck E. Cheese that people loved. It survived by becoming something else. The new version leans into a redesigned, modernized animatronic light, trampoline and arcade app and game card experience. Cleaner, more efficient, more contemporary, and almost entirely drained of the specific weird magic that made the original what it was. The robots that were the soul of the place. The direct line back to Nolan Bushnell watching the Country Bears at Disneyland and dreaming of putting that on a street corner. Those are mostly gone, kept alive in only a tiny handful of legacy locations, and, more vividly, in the garages of obsessive fans who loved them enough to save what the company threw away. So the brand lives, the wonder doesn't. And there's a real question about which of those two things was actually Chuck E. Cheese. Let me pull back and say what I think this story actually is, because it's easy to file it under kids' tastes changed and COVID finished it off. And that's the tidy version. And I don't think the tidy version is true. Nolan Bushnell built two world-changing companies, Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, and lost control of both the same way. A visionary who dreamed further than the market could follow, who over-leveraged and overexpanded and got wiped out when conditions turned. Twice, running almost the identical script. There's a tragedy in that at the level of the founder, a man who invented the video game industry and invented the American children's entertainment restaurant and got to keep neither. But that's not the tragedy I mean. The tragedy I mean is what happened to the wonder, because the wonder actually worked. For 40 years, this insane idea, Disneyland on a street corner, singing robots and pizza and arcade games all mashed together into a temple of childhood celebration. It worked. Kids loved it with the pure, total love that only kids are capable of. It became the setting of millions of people's happiest early memories. The demand for it never died. Kids in 2020 would have loved a fully staffed, well-maintained robot band playing Chuck E. Cheese every bit as much as kids in 1985 did, because being made to feel like the king of the world on your birthday does not go out of style. The love was always there. The love is still there. You can measure it in the grown adults restoring animatronics in their garages, in the wave of nostalgia every time one of these places changes. What died was the willingness to pay for the wonder. And that willingness died in 2014 in a leveraged buyout when the company got chained to $1 billion of debt, and every decision afterward had to answer to the lenders before it answered to the children. The animatronics didn't get removed because kids stopped wanting robots. They got removed because robots are expensive and the debt was hungry. The buildings didn't get tired because nobody knew how to keep them fresh. They got tired because the money that would have kept them fresh was going out the door to service a debt the company took on so that a private equity firm could buy it with borrowed money and hope to sell it later for more. That's the pattern. And it's the same pattern under so many of these dead and dying American places. A founder builds something magical and inefficient and beloved. It works because of the magic and despite the inefficiency. And then, decades later, it passes into the hands of people who look at it and see only the inefficiency, who see the expensive animatronics and the specialist technicians and the maintenance and the wonder, and think, we can strip that out and the brand will coast on its name for a while. And they're right, it does coast for a while. But the magic was the thing. The magic was always the thing. And once you've decided the magic is a cost to be minimized rather than the product itself, you've already lost, even if the sign stays lit for another decade. The mouse was supposed to be a rat. The whole thing was always a little bit wrong, a little bit uncanny, a little bit held together by a strange man's strange love. And that wrongness, that specific handmade weirdness, was inseparable from why kids loved it. You cannot financially optimize a singing rat mouse into a better version of himself. You can only make him cheaper and quieter and eventually still, and finally cart him off to a warehouse while a screen and a dance floor take his place on the stage where he used to sing. Somewhere out there tonight, there's a kid having a birthday at a Chuck E. Cheese, and they're having a wonderful time, because being a celebrated kid is wonderful, and the pizza is fine, and the games are fun, and none of them ever met the robots, so they can't miss them. And that's okay. That's genuinely okay. Kids don't need the specific magic you had. They'll find their own. But somewhere else tonight there's a grown adult in a garage, carefully resoldering a servo in the arm of a 40-year-old animatronic bear that a corporation threw in a dumpster during concept unification, getting it to raise its guitar and sing one more time to an audience of no one. And I think that person understands something about Chuck E. Cheese that the people who owned it at the end never did. Think about what that devotion actually is. These are not wealthy collectors buying trophies. They're mostly ordinary people who were children in the 1980s, who have spent real money they didn't have to spare and hundreds of hours they'll never get back tracking down the actual robots, the exact bear, the exact gorilla from the restaurants of their childhood, buying them off the people who salvaged them, learning obsolete programming languages to make them move again, rebuilding the pneumatics, writing new shows for them. There is an entire underground community devoted to keeping these thrown-away pizza restaurant robots alive. A corporation looked at those machines and saw a line item, an expense, a thing to be efficiently removed. And a generation of the kids who grew up in front of them looked at the very same machines and saw something worth devoting their adult lives to preserving. That gap between what the owners saw and what the customers saw is the entire story. It's the whole thing in miniature. One side was counting costs, the other side was in love. And when the people counting costs are the ones holding the company, the thing the other side loved doesn't stand a chance, no matter how much it's loved. The robots were never the cost. The robots were the whole point. Everyone who ever stood in front of that stage as a child knew it. It just turned out that knowing it and loving it and remembering it forever was not the same as owning it. And in the end, the people who owned it got to decide, and they decided the magic wasn't worth the price.